Funding for this program is made possible by Burke Nursery and Garden Center in Burke, Virginia. You'll find trees and shrubs, perennials and annuals, water garden supplies, houseplants, and bird and gardening supplies. Burke Nursery also provides landscape, plant diagnostic, and installation services, as well as the October month-long Pumpkin Playground Festival featuring hay rides and much more. For more information, you can check out their website or call 703-323-1188. Welcome to Gardening with Burke Nursery. I'm your host, Misty Kuceris, and today we're going to be talking about gardening on the patio with greens, which means lettuce. Fall is a great time to plant. This is a time to plant your pansies, your chrysanthemums, your asters, even your ornamental cabbage. But the best thing to plant during the fall time period is what we call cold crops. These are cool season vegetables that love the weather as it cools down and gives you edible foods. So some of these are asparagus, beets, broccoli, Brussels sprouts, lettuce, cauliflower, Swiss chard, onions, and peas as well. And usually you plant them early enough in the fall so that the cold of the winter doesn't kill them. But today I'm going to teach you how to create a small little garden on your deck or even in your yard that will give you lettuce or Swiss chard or kale or other types of cold crops throughout the whole winter. Before I do that though, what I do is I get a lot of questions from people that come to either Burke Nursery or even via email, and these questions deal with situations of how to do plantings. And today, the question that I get is, when I buy the seeds, can I take these seeds and can I plant them into the ground without having to do anything to the seeds? Well, when you first get the seeds, they're dormant. That means that they're not doing anything. They're not growing in the packaging. That's a good thing. You don't want to open the package and already find that the seeds have sprouted. But there is a difference between your pea seeds and something like your lettuce seeds. What you want to do is the pea seeds have a very, very hard shell. And your lettuce seeds have very small little tiny seeds. And so what you have here, the pea seeds look like shriveled up dried peas, and then the lettuce seeds almost look like some sort of dry herb that you may get. So what you really want to do to have these pea seeds grow better is you want to do what's called basically getting them to sprout. And it's called pre-germination. And the way to pre-germinate these seeds is you take a paper towel and you moisten this paper towel. So I'm just going to walk over to the water here, figure out how to use this water here. The one nice thing about this setup is that I'm actually in a kitchen setup, and what that means is that you don't always have to be outside to do any of these gardening things. You can actually be indoors and do some of these things, such as create this patio little lettuce garden right inside your house if you don't feel like doing it outside. So I've taken the seeds and I've put them on a moist towel here, and then I'm just going to fold over the moist towel over the seeds, and then a Ziploc bag or any other kind of plastic bag. And you put the seeds in the bag, Don't seal the bag though. That's very important to leave the bag open. And then you'll just take this and set it aside, and you'll set it aside in an area that's on the darker side, not an area that is in full sun. So in a few days, what you'll find is that the seeds start germinating, and once they get their little germination going, once they split, you'll be able to put them in a pot, or you'll be able to plant them into the ground. So that's my little tip. And it's also a fun little thing for your kids to do, because that way they can start learning about seeds and what's inside seeds and how these seeds grow into plants. So what I'd like to talk about now is I'd like to talk about creating technically a terrarium garden for your lettuce. So it's real easy. You go to the store and you get yourself a plastic container. Make sure that it's a plastic container that has a lid as well as the base. The next thing that you do is you get yourself a bag of potting mix. And the bag of potting mix, this is a 12-quart potting mix. This lid can actually handle a 16-quart potting mix. So you look at the size of the lid, and you make sure that your potting mix fits the lid, but is not larger than the lid. That's important, and I'll explain why in a little bit. Then, some fun tools: a screwdriver, a trowel, an X-Acto blade, or if you don't have one of these, then scissors will do. So now to create this garden. Usually the best time to do this is October or November, because that's when you still have enough warmth, but not too much warmth, and you have the coolness that your lettuce seeds like to sprout. But in honesty, sometimes life gets in the way. And when I did this last year, I didn't get to it until December. Still a success story, but it was definitely December. So the first thing that you do, and this is why you want your little screwdriver. You poke holes in the bag. I'm getting a little excited here. You can be gentler if you want. You take the bag and take the holes and put the bag on the lid with the holes down. Then you take your X-Acto knife or blade or whatever they're called. And what you're actually going to do is you're going to create a pot from this bag. So you're just cutting the bag and now, voila, I have a little pot for my seeds. And I do recommend if you could use an X-Acto blade, it's a lot easier than scissors. Now, believe it or not, this bag actually has too much potting mix in it. So you will need to remove about half of that potting mix. And since it's potting mix, you can use it for any of your other plants, so you're not going to be losing the potting mix at all. And if you have a little covering here and you're doing it in your kitchen, then you're going to find that it contains the mess. And if you're doing this outside on a table, then you don't care if you do the mess, make the mess, because you can just go and wipe the table off. And see how I have edges here? And that's important to have these little edges. And look at that. That's almost half of that bag of potting mix that you use for something else later. So the next thing is to decide what seeds that I want. And since I'm dealing with something that only has about 2 inches of soil here, I'm going to go with lettuce, I'm going to go with kale, I'm going to go with spinach. And you'll see the end results in a little bit, and I'll show you a mistake that I made last year because I got overzealous. Those little seeds right there, they may be small, but they produce a lot of crop. So it's very important when you plant that you don't put down too much. And this is another way that this becomes an all-purpose tool, the screwdriver. Just create a little indentation in here. And then take your seeds and just put a few. Unfortunately, there's so much vermiculite, and vermiculite is this white stuff that you see in your potting mix. And vermiculite is actually good because it helps with drainage, but when you have that much vermiculite, you can't really see that I'm putting the seeds in. Just a little bit of seeds here. And people always ask me, how many seeds come in a seed package? Well, or how many plants am I going to get from a seed package? They never really tell you. They sell this more by weight than they do by the volume of the end product. But if you could see inside here, which I don't think you could even with our great camera operators, I have used less than half of the bag. I would say I've used maybe 1/3 of the seeds in the bag. So then I'm going to do the same thing with spinach. And spinach, the spinach seed is a little bit larger. So you may be able to see that much better. And then again, put down a couple of the spinach seeds. And then finally, again, I've used maybe 1/4 of the seeds that are in this bag. And then finally, the kale. I know kale's supposed to be healthy for you, but in honesty, I'm not a big kale fan, so I'm only creating 1 row of kale, even though I have 2 rows of the lettuce and 2 rows of the spinach. And that's it. Now, the next thing that you do is that you just gently cover, and you don't cover it too much because you don't want those seeds to be too deep. If the seeds are too deep, then you're going to have trouble with germination. So the next thing that we would do, and I'm not going to do this here for a number of reasons, but basically you want to wet this whole thing. And you don't want to wet it a lot. Actually, let me show you about, and I can show you with my hands on this. I think I figured out how to work this water. So I just have a little in my hands, and that's really all you're going to be doing throughout the whole thing, just a little bit of water. And then, after that, we're ready to start growing. So what you do is the base now becomes the top. And what I have here is I have a terrarium. And I would put this terrarium, like I said, you can put it on your patio, you can put it on your deck, you can put it inside the house. It really won't work, but, and the reason it won't work inside the house is because, believe it or not, your house would be too warm. And what will happen is, because you've watered this, you'll find that you don't need to water it after. You've created a self-sustaining. So what I'd like to do is I would like to show you some pictures of the end result here. And so the first picture that you'll see, you'll see that it's the actual enclosure, but you may not be able to tell. But that picture, there is actually moisture that is collected all over the box. And that moisture keeps perpetuating. And like I said, I did this in December. And so it was there throughout the winter months. And what happened is that if you look at the next picture is the first germination. So this is a picture that I took about 2 weeks later. And each of these seeds have a germination time of about 10 days, about 2 weeks, except for the Swiss chard, which is what I used here, and that has a longer germination time. But also what happened is, when I was telling you about the importance of not putting down too many seeds, well, when I did this, I got overzealous. And all of those seeds and all of those sprouts there's actually way, way too many. And so what I had to do was I had to actually go and thin out some of those seeds. Now, or thin out some of those plants. Now, some people may say, well, why do I want to thin out those plants? Well, you want to thin them out because if you don't thin them out, what happens is that they won't grow the right amount that you need them to grow to eat, that they'll also potentially have some fungal problems and some infection problems. And the other is that you really want to make certain that when you end up with your final product, you have a real nice, lush product. And so finally, the last picture that I want to show, that's a picture of my mustard greens. And those mustard greens, that picture was taken in April. So that shows you that this grew in December, January, February, and March during that time period. And what I would do if I wanted something is I would just lift off the top and not totally take it off, but just lift it up. This, you'll see it better this way. Lift it this way. And then I would pluck what I wanted to eat. And then I would also check and see if it was dry or not. If it was dry, at that point, I'd put in a little more water, and then I'd close it. The other thing that I recommend is if the temperatures go down below 30 for extended periods of time, in the evening, if you would cover this with an old sheet or an old blanket, that will make it a lot better. I am so happy that I was able to share with you what technically is a terrarium garden so that you can have lettuce or kale or other green crops throughout the winter months that are fresh. And there are also, not only do you want to plant these as seeds, you can also purchase any of these cold crops already as plants and plant them in the garden as well. And what I'd like to do, though, is even though we've been talking about edibles and vegetables, I'm going to put this aside here. One of the questions that I get a lot this time of year is about chrysanthemums. Chrysanthemums are a fun flower. They're amazing. There are so many chrysanthemums that have come up over the years. And chrysanthemums were considered, and still are considered, the royalty and the symbol of royalty in Japan. They're just a wonderful plant. The main question that I get from people is, why is it that when I plant my chrysanthemums in September or October, when they look beautiful, they don't come back every year? A lot of people say they've been told that chrysanthemums are perennials and they'll return back and back, but they don't. Well, what's actually happened is that yes, chrysanthemums are a fall flowering plant. Mums is also what they're called. And they're beautiful. They add a lot of color, they add a lot of statement, depending on the type that you get. But if you really want them to come back, the time period to plant these mums, these chrysanthemums, is actually at the end of July, beginning of August. What happens is when you plant them that early, it gives their roots more time to grow into the soil, to gain root strength, and to really blossom. You may think, oh my word, that's still too warm. I'm not going to get the flowers that I want in the fall. Well, that's not true. You will get the flowers that you want in the fall, and you have a better chance come March, come April, come May of having those chrysanthemums come back. And so then when they do come back in the springtime, what you can do is, if you want the shrub look, is that you can keep them pruned to about 4 inches until July when you stop pruning them, and that'll give you a nice bushy look as well. So think about that. Oh, and one thing too about pansies, again, that's another plant that is a beautiful fall plant. Well, pansies are what I call 2 plants for the price of 1. Because your winter hardy pansies look beautiful in the fall. They even actually don't look that bad during the winter months. And then what happens is they shake off the snow or they shake off the sleet, and then spring comes back, and those pansies look beautiful in your garden or in your pot until they die out in June, July from the heat. So when you're thinking about your edible crops and what you want to do for that, if you do want to plant lettuce or kale or any of those edible crops directly into your garden, make sure that you do that in September. If you want to create this terrarium so that you can have these crops throughout the winter months, it helps if you do it a little earlier than I did in December, but definitely no later than December. And then if it gets too cold with the cold crops, cover the terrarium. Meanwhile, the cold crops in the ground really won't be there. Oh, and another crop that's very important to plant in September is your garlic bulbs. So that way by July, end of July, beginning of August, you can get some phenomenal organic garlic growing in your yard. So thank you very much. And if you have any questions, especially questions that you would like answered on this show, please feel free to email me. My email address is misty@burkenursery.com. I'd like to thank you so much for spending your time with me. I really appreciate it, and I'm looking forward to helping you grow your garden. Funding for this program is made possible by Burke Nursery and Garden Center in Burke, Virginia. You'll find trees and shrubs, perennials and annuals, water garden supplies, houseplants, and bird and gardening supplies. Burke Nursery also provides landscape, plant diagnostic, and installation services, as well as the October month-long Pumpkin Playground Festival featuring hayrides and much more. For more information, you can check out their website or call 703-323-1188.